So this topic is probably my favorite topic in the whole wide world. Coaching is my first love. I was coached for the first time in 2009 and was hooked immediately and went on a lifelong quest to understand how it works and to do it well. Not long after that, I was exposed to the neuroscience of coaching because I was still curious as to why it worked and how it worked. One thing led to another. Some brilliant mentors and a fellowship with two PhDs from Harvard and Yale, Dr. Larkin and Johnson from the Applied Neuroscience Institute, and then went on to work at a neurofeedback clinic, a brain clinic. When I'm not doing coaching now, we're looking at brains. This is a clinical grade EEG headset, and it looks like something out of Star Wars, but I'll humor you and put it on. Lets me read my clients' brains, get a map. We can look at the impact before and after coaching and other things that I do. This whole thing started when I was about 6 years old. Um, we were eating dinner, pasta, if I recall correctly. And my older brother was really into space. He had NASA Lego sets and loved watching Star Trek. And this phrase, "the final frontier," was being batted around the table. And I asked what that meant because the only context I had for frontier was a book I had about the Oregon Trail, and I didn't understand what the final frontier was. When I was told it was space, space was the final frontier. We'd explored everything else that was left to explore, and space was the last thing. And I think a little angsty that my older brother had claimed the final frontier as his interest. I asked if there were any other frontiers available. My parents thought for a while. For context, my dad's a doctor and chemist. My mom is a nurse practitioner and pharmacologist. Um, After a while, they said, well, the brain. We don't really know how the brain works. We kind of do, but not really. It's also a frontier. And I think that's when I decided I wanted to do this work. If I really had to guess. Life went on. I was looking through microscopes before I could ride a bike and had my own mouse lab and a fridge full of blood agar plates in the kitchen. That was my life. Um, so I've always kind of seen things through the lens of science. And I've been frustrated that coaching is so divorced from science. It shouldn't be. What we do is remarkable, and I would argue highly scientific, but we don't measure it well. So one of my many life quests is to reintroduce science to coaching and coaching to science. And because this is, I would argue, an intellectual pursuit, often it's a meaning-making exercise, coaching. The neuroscience of coaching is a very relevant topic. So that's why we're all here today, to look at the neuroscience of coaching, what is the connection point between the two. My thesis for you today is that coaching is conversational neurofeedback. If you know what neurofeedback is, that may make sense. If you don't know what neurofeedback is, that probably doesn't make sense. Neurofeedback is a way of using EEG to tune the brain, not dissimilar to how you would tune a piano. It allows the brain to see itself and through operant conditioning, just gamification, gradually tune things to where they should be. And when done well, it works remarkably well. It's just short of magic, in my opinion. Coaching is very similar. So in a neurofeedback session, first time I see you, we'll put this thing on. I'll measure your brain. I'll get a baseline state. It's called a QEEG or a quantitative EEG. It's a way of seeing where your brain is at, a snapshot of your brain. In a good coaching conversation, we do this. It's an inquiry conversation. We're setting a big A agenda. Where are you? What do you want? What does a successful coaching engagement together look like over the months ahead? We're establishing a baseline. That's our QEEG in a coaching relationship. In a neurofeedback relationship, I'm going to then have a custom protocol for you based around your goals and your needs, just like in coaching. And then we're going to sit down and we're going to do brain training. We're going to do neurofeedback over and over and over again for weeks, just like you're going to have coaching sessions back to back. The neurofeedback has a few phases. The first phase is your subconscious mind figuring it out. So I'll hook you up, I'll put the game on, You're going to be convinced that you're not doing anything and that this is hocus pocus. Meanwhile, your subconscious mind is figuring out how to make the game work. Coaching's kind of like that. There's a few sessions where your client is figuring out coaching. You're training them on the nature of the relationship. At some point, the client figures it out, right? Same thing happens in neurofeedback. The client's subconscious mind figures out what it has to do to make the brain work. And you'll see it. I'll say 3, 2, 1, go. I'll hit play and I'll see brainwaves change. Cool. Their brain figured this out. Now they have to figure out what their brain figured out. Coaching is the same way. There's a point in coaching where the client's subconscious mind figures something out. There's a bit of a shift in the conversation. And then we have to make that subconscious shift conscious awareness. There's metacognition, awareness of your awareness. We have to create that in a coaching session. We do the same thing in neurofeedback. And then from there, you get to have fun. Once the subconscious awareness is conscious insight, you can craft action around it. And ideally, I would argue in neurofeedback, we're doing the same thing. Can we actually take this state you've found and make it an intentional part of who you are moving forward? Well, it's very similar. We're essentially using conversation to do neurofeedback and coaching. And I have seen it. I have coached people on EEG, and I have seen the shift. We actually now know there was a study published in August of last year. Insight is an alpha burst that happens right about here. It usually happens in silence. So you ask your client a question, they reflect on it for a while. There's this nice pregnant pause about 10 seconds long. If you don't interrupt it, that alpha burst actually carries into gamma. And I'll explain what all those words mean in a second. That's where the insight happens. That's the aha moment. That's the flash. That's the, right? And you'll see it in a coaching session. They sit and they think for a while. I think what it is, they just had the insight. That's that process. We're literally creating the space in a coaching conversation if we do it right. Now, I mentioned alpha, I mentioned gamma. What is that? With neurofeedback, we're measuring electrical activity on the neocortex. It's the outside of your brain. We measure that in waves per second. Think of that as waves at the beach. That's how many waves are coming in. That's how fast the waves are going, right? Slow waves, delta, 1 to 4 waves in a second. This is sleep. This is big, slow lumbering waves. They're the predominant wave in your whole brain all the time. They also function as your brain's brake pedal. Next is theta, 4 to 8 waves in a second. That's pre-sleep, meditation, visualization, imagination. When we do a future self exercise, that's creating a theta state. You have them close their eyes. When you close your eyes, you go into a theta state. You start visualizing things. You're doing coaching in theta. Very powerful. Alpha is the next one up. That's 8 to 13 waves in a second. It's like third gear in your car. Relaxed, present, focused, just this, just now. The most popular form of neurofeedback is called alpha theta training, where we're training on that cusp of pre-sleep meditation, visualization, imagination, and relaxed, present, focus, just this, just now, which is what you're doing in future self. When you coach someone in future self, it's a present, relaxed, focus, just this, just now, eyes closed visualization. That is alpha theta. You're doing alpha theta training in a coaching conversation. After theta comes beta. Beta is a big band, 13 to 32. It's fast. This is where thinking lives. Low beta, 13 to 20-ish, feels like a snow globe in your head. Lots of loose, fluffy thoughts. High beta, 20 to 32, feels like a pinball game in your head. Lots of fast thoughts. This is where thinking happens. It's not bad. Not the most effective space for coaching. You can help them get more into that alpha state. Present, relaxed, focus, just this, just now. Way better coaching conversation. So when I say there's an alpha burst here, there's a burst of present, relaxed, focus, just this, just now. If we don't interrupt it, it carries all the way through beta into gamma. Gamma is 32 to 100 waves in a second. Very fast. This is where our concept of God lives. We also know that matter is a collapsed wave. I'm talking delta, theta, alpha, beta, gamma. If you can get someone to gamma, you are very close to turning a thought into reality. You're collapsing a wave. This is really cool stuff we get to do. So alpha burst over here. We don't interrupt it. We don't start talking. If we start talking, they start thinking. Thinking happens in beta. We ruin the insight. We got to start all over again. One of your biggest takeaways from this session is to be quiet. It's interesting that it happens here. This is your language processing area. It's called Wernicke's area. This is your language meaning making area, Broca's area. Insight happens between the two. It's very interesting. It's also happening very close to what is called your sensory motor strip, which is this little 3 centimeter wide strip over your ears, like a hairband. It's where you do stuff, sensory motor. Coarsely speaking, you take data in back here, occipital lobe. This is your five senses, sense of body and space and time, proprioception, balance, all the input. You process it here in your parietal. You make meaning here in your temporal. You decide here with your prefrontal, and you act on it here. The brain's a lot more complicated than that. That's coarsely speaking. Okay. Insight again is happening right here. So we've got processing, we got meaning making, we got language processing and meaning making, we've got action or insight happening right here, and action happening here. Why do I tell you this? Coaching works best when it's a whole brain activity. If you go to a conference and you're there for 2 days, you learn a ton, you're on cloud nine, you come home, your friend says, how was the conference? It was great. What'd you learn? Well, they talked to, it was amazing. Why does that happen? This is loose impressions. This is where stuff lives when we don't make it a whole brained activity. It's just a loose impression. This is where your client is in a conversation if you don't have an action phase. They have the insight, carries through the gamma. Great. What do you want to do with that? I'll probably like journal on it. All right, same time next week. A very limited chance of success. But if we take this impression, that was a great coaching session. I learned some stuff. And we start processing it. We start breaking it down. When do you want to start? What's the next smallest step? Who might help you with this? What might get in the way? What are your solutions to those obstacles? What accountability do you need? We start breaking it down. We're actually sending it over here, piece by piece. We're processing it. We're making meaning out of it. We're deciding what to do with it. And we're making a plan so we can do it. We're even writing it down, which really involves this sensory motor strip. We're making it a whole brain activity. The coaching framework is a neurological framework. We just don't see it that way. But if you do what we train you to do, it's going to work because you're working with this. We're basically just a meat chassis for this. I'm going to stop there to see if there's any questions and clarifications. That was a lot of information I dumped in about 15 minutes, and I want to make sure we're all on the same page. So what questions or thoughts come up for you as I kind of discuss how coaching is essentially conversational neurofeedback?
Are there corollary PET scans to show the same type of activity?
I have not worked with PET. Most of my work, almost virtually all of it, has been with EEG. I do work a bit with SPECT scans, which is oxygenation and blood flow. The correlation is profound. You can overlay an EEG, like a QEEG, with a SPECT scan pretty straightforwardly. I don't know enough about PET scans to tell you, Tom. I'm sorry. It's just not a method. MRI and PET are not two methods I am confident enough to work with.
Sure. And does this imply that coaching is a treatment modality?
I don't think so. So the difference between a clinical approach and a coach approach, a clinical approach is top down. I have something you don't have. I'm going to give it to you, and there's something here to fix. A coaching approach is we are parallel. You're the expert in your life. I'm the expert in coaching, and I've got a radical belief that you're creative, resourceful, and whole. And I think that foundational philosophical approach has a profound impact on the nature of the entire relationship. So it is a modality no different than coaching is like neurofeedback is a modality, coaching is a modality, but coaching grew out of the positive psychology movement,
Mhm.
which is that if we're not working with the past pain, trauma, or working with your strengths, goals, and values, and we're looking at the future, not the past, then it's no longer clinical. And I think there's a way to do what we do, whether it's neurofeedback or coaching, in a way that is non-clinical. Um,
Mhm. Yeah, I'm going to have to expand on that because as a former medical professional, I have to stay in a boundary away from
yeah,
what looks like treatment.
sure, sure. Um, the primary difference is where you're focused. So if I have a client come in and I say, in what areas of your life would you like to improve, or what symptoms are you facing? That's going to be a clinical modality. It might be brain fog, insomnia, depression, and fatigue. But if I ask them, what are your goals in life? Well, I'd like to feel clear. I'd like to have energy.
Mhm.
I'd like to be happy, and I'd like to be calm. Those are goals we're working towards, not problems we're trying to fix. All I did was put the positive word in for the symptoms they're facing, but the focus is different. And the base code of the brain is what you focus on grows. That's your second massive takeaway from today. The first is to just be quiet more in coaching. Let the silence work for you. The second is what you focus on grows. That is the base code of the brain. It's the salience network. One of the most prominent networks in this brain is called the salience network. The I in the time model importance is salience. It's out of all this stuff that you just said, out of all this stuff that you're thinking, what's important, relevant, meaningful to you? The best example I can think of this is you buy a car. You fill out tons of paperwork, you spend thousands of dollars, you spend tons of hours researching, you've invested a lot in this thing. And when you sign over the information for that car and the money for that car, there's a massive spike in cortisol, dopamine. You feel a ton of things,
Mhm.
right? Your brain, which is pretty agnostic, says, well, something about this red Mazda Miata really lights you up. I don't know what it is, but I haven't seen a spike like that in years. So red Mazda Miatas must be really important to you because you got really stressed, you got really excited. Whenever you drive this thing, you get really excited. It's a huge piece of your identity. Like this is important to you. So I'm going to show you every red Mazda Miata we drive by. It's not that everybody else went out and bought red Mazda Miatas when you did. It's the salience network. It's important to you, right? So when I say what you focus on grows, it's just a way of saying the brain filters what it takes in. Remember, it takes it in back here in the occipital,
Mhm.
processes it, makes meaning. When it gets to here, this is one half of 1/1 millionth of 1% of the data you took in back here.
Sure.
Um,
So generating a felt need and facilitating synchronicity in the brain is part of what coaching does.
yeah, that's the agenda. So at the academies, we teach you time. There's lots of agendas for coaching. Um, Time, focus, grow, growth, growing, T grow, to grow. There's lots of them, but they're just acronyms for an agenda. The time model is topic. A great example of that would be what's important for us to focus on today. I is importance. So this is importance, impact, relevance. What's the most important piece of that for us to focus on together in the next half hour? What makes that important to you? What will the impact be of this conversation for you? Something like that. M in time is measurement. So at the end of this conversation, who are you going to be? How are you going to feel? What are you going to have that makes it successful, essentially? And then E is echo. I'm making sure we're on the same page, looking for an emphatic yes. That's an agenda model. Most of
Sure.
you know that.
Coaching is basically reinforcing a normal process
Yeah, it's
rather than
highly codified.
imposing a theoretical treatment model over someone.
It's a great way to put it.
Okay, that's helpful.
Yeah. Thanks, Tom. Good questions. What else is in the space? I want to catch up on the chat here. I'm about 18 things behind. Nice. Okay.
Are you currently involved with research then in this regard?
I'm not. I'm currently involved in raising two young children. So when
Raising two
they're a
young
little when they're a little older, yeah, we're going to get more into research for sure. That's a definite goal. Okay. This is helpful stuff in the chat. Thanks. What else is in the space, Jaya?
Uh, do you have experience? Oh, hang on a sec. Somebody is barking, speaking. Um, do you have experience with what I'm starting to do, but you have thousands more clients than I have, with integrating with other modalities that work with the brain, acupuncture, craniosacral, mind medicines, and how that's affecting the coaching process and trajectory working with people?
Mhm. The trickiest part, I think, of doing multimodality coaching is that coaching is very unique and that it is parallel. And I have yet to find any other people helping discipline that is parallel. So when I incorporate neurofeedback or HRV biofeedback, which is a way of training the peripheral nervous system, it's your fight, flight, freeze, fawn response to your rest, digest response. When I use photobiomodulation, which is a way of using light to increase oxygenation and blood flow to the brain, when I do a gene-based supplement plan, those are very hard, if not impossible, to do in a parallel method. That's I'm giving you something by definition you don't have. So the trick comes is how we separate it. And what I usually end up doing is separating my coaching sessions from my other stuff, right? I'll have training material and coursework. We'll have sessions focused on a modality, and then we'll also have coaching conversations where we're integrating what they're learning. But it's very hard to do um, coaching in the same context as some of the other modalities. That can be done. I will do EEG guided coaching and coaching guided EEG. But as I've already said, they're very similar. Those two pair better than most. If you do breathing exercises with your clients prior to a coaching session, you're essentially doing HRV with your coaching. Your breath communicates your reality to your peripheral nervous system. So when you do a breathing exercise, you're changing the state of your peripheral nervous system. I do know some coaches who work in the psychedelic space. I think it's tricky, especially here in the US. But there's some profound research being done with psilocybin in particular. Um, I think the short answer, Jay, is it's complicated. Yeah. Michael.
Edward, when you mapped out how the brain processes in different areas, I started visualizing, associating that with the essential qualities of coaching. And I was wondering, is that an appropriate way to look at it? That somehow, if we coach at a high level, we are activating all those parts of the brain that get to the gamma state, or not gamma, but the alpha state, where insights really cause not just behavioral change, but neurological change.
It's a fun way to look at it. Um, I think what makes it difficult to answer that question head on is neurofeedback is the most technically complex thing I've ever come across. I feel like I'm better at it than most practitioners I know, and I'm barely qualified to do it. So to simplify something that complex, like the more you simplify it, the more you're losing some vital pieces of it. But Um, the goal of neurofeedback isn't necessarily to create a predominant brain state as it is to tune the signal that's there. So there should be in a given region at a given in a given person a ratio of activity. Roughly speaking, eyes open, most parts of the brain we're looking for a ratio of 4x delta to 1x beta with a nice even curve. But there's also the wave shape. Different regions have different ratios. For instance, you have more alpha happening back here than you do up here. You have more amplitude or how high the wave is at the top of the brain than the sides of the brain. So it's complicated. Um, with coaching, I think the real name of the game goes back to that research study by Robinson et al. In 2016, linking insight to behavior change. And if you've been in a class with me, we've talked about that research paper. That is probably the central research to coaching, linking insight to behavior change. That's the name of the game. So once that alpha spike happens, we don't interrupt it, it carries through to gamma. There's this aha moment, this light bulb moment, and you can actually see a flash of visible light when a new neural pathway is created. When an axon and a dendrite connect, there's a slight pop of light. It's an electrochemical signal. It's pretty cool. But that process is only half of it. If we are creating insight and not linking it to behavior change, I would posit we are doing harm. Because if I create insight for you, the person you are in here changes, and the person you are out here doesn't change. I've just widened the gap between who you are and how you express yourself. That's called cognitive dissonance. And that gap is much of what is wrong with the world. So if we're going to create insight, it behooves us to then link it to behavior change. That's a big part of the puzzle. And that does not stop with the alpha burst into the gamma and the insight. That stops with, now that we've created the insight, can we take this insight and then chunk it over here piece by piece into a rational, logical, step-by-step process that is intrinsically motivated? We have to do it.
Unfortunately, insight in mood disorders, insight and judgment are independent variables. You can create tremendous insight and move to grandiosity without judgment. So have you thought about judgment in regards to this process?
I don't think I have enough of a background with mood disorders to have that conversation with you. We're predominantly talking about healthy minds and healthy people.
Whatever that is.
You're right. People who choose to see themselves as creative, resourceful, and whole.
Yeah, well, but you can have insight that leads to behaviors, not horribly delusional behaviors, but behaviors without the understanding of the risk or without the danger. And so it
My
seems like
favorite, my favorite angle for that thought, Tom, Martin Seligman, he's considered the father of positive psychology and by extension, the father of our profession in coaching. He and his research partner um, did a lot of work around values. And Chris Peterson was his research partner. He's unfortunately passed, but Chris Peterson's big contribution to that work was looking at how our weaknesses are actually the absence, opposite, or excess of our values. So if you were to take, say, the VIA assessment and look at your top values, your top 5 would be your biggest strengths, and your weaknesses would not be 20 to 24. Your weaknesses would be the warping of your top 5. And that was Chris Peterson didn't finish that research, but I really love that perspective on mental illness, which was the angle he was taking it at. That the ultimate disembodiment of us from our values is what causes pathology.
that's a scary thought. You realize society is dismantling our values constantly.
It's an interesting conversation. Luann, I saw your hand up.
Yeah. So I'm hoping I'm following you because Edward, I feel like you're at the gamma and I might be at the alpha beta stage. But I'm wondering if, as a coach, I heard you say one of the things that we can do is be quiet because they're in the thinking phase. What else pops out as things we really need to lean into as a coach that helps them maybe move between the stages? Because I'm thinking I have clients that come in that are really amped up
Yeah.
and move, helping them get into that beta phase, I guess, where they're really engaged in the thinking for themselves. Hope I said that with some clarity.
Thanks for grounding it for me. The beautiful thing is what we've codified in this profession, if we do it well, aligns and like maps to the neuroscience of the process remarkably well. If your client feels safe, if your client can relax in your presence and get out of a cortisol dump, um, they're going to be coached better because blood, gets shunted away from your brain and towards your major muscle groups when you're stressed, and it goes towards your prefrontal and neocortex when you're not, which is where you're going to have best coaching. So, number one, help your client feel safe. That's regulate your own nervous system first, whether that's a walk or sleep or breathing or whatever else you do before a session to get in a good mood, a good zone. Your client's going to entrain to your mood somewhat. So things that you can do to help you yourself regulate your own peripheral nervous system is going to help your client do the same. That's number one. Number two is specificity. The brain thrives with it. It receives lack of specificity as a threat. So the agenda model is huge. And if you've taken a class with me, you've heard me say it, your coaching session is made or broken by your agenda. Like, get super specific in your agenda. The more specific, the better. Do not move beyond E and echo until you can confidently say to yourself, yes, I can coach this successfully in half an hour. What do you want to work on today? My leadership. That's the whole section of a bookstore. That is not a coaching topic, right? All right. Well, okay. What about leadership? My communication as a leader. Still huge. That is also a section of the bookstore. All right. When you think about communication, what's the one context where you think your communication needs the most work? I really think it's how I communicate with my direct report, Steve. Oh, we're getting somewhere. What's like your best case scenario for communication with Steve? I really think it comes down to how we communicate in between meetings to get projects done. He's a great employee. I don't want to lose him, but if something doesn't change, I'm going to have to let him go because we talk past each other constantly, and I have to find some way to make sure he's understanding what I'm saying and I'm communicating it effectively in between meetings. Okay, I can coach that. I say to myself. Don't move past time until you got something specific. Otherwise, it's not going to work. The next thing, try to spot that shift. The next thing is silence. You cannot hold too much silence in a coaching conversation. The longest pause I've heard is a minute long. That is an eternity in a conversation. If I held a minute of space right now, you'd all be squirming. Most of you'd want to interrupt me. But if you can hold space for 5, 10, 15 seconds, the worst thing that's going to happen is they're going to awkwardly say about 10 seconds in, are you there? And you get to confidently smile and say, absolutely. I was just reflecting on what you said, which is one of the most profound gifts you can give somebody in this world. When was the last time someone reflected on what you said for 15 seconds? I doubt ever, right? So hold space. If you can hold space, you're going to create insight. The next thing you can do is spot the shift. We talk about this a lot in coaching, but that alpha spike in the space that bursts into gamma and there's the aha, there's usually some kind of sign. It may be one of these. Huh. It could be they get really excited and lean forward, moving their hands, and they're bouncing up and down. Their voice could get elevated, their tone, their tempo, something changes. You might actually feel something. It might be invisible on them, but the hair on the back of your neck stands up, or you get goosebumps, or you get chills, or you start to cry for some reason. That's still a clue.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you can spot that, that's the shift. Now we have to take, just like neurofeedback, we have to take that subconscious shift and make it conscious awareness, metacognition, awareness of their awareness. So in a coaching conversation, it felt like something just shifted there. What shifted? What are you realizing? What's becoming clearer? What are you noticing? What changed? Something like that. And then from there, what do you want to do with it? We have to make sure we're linking insight to behavior change, and we're going to craft action. Not rushing through the action phase, but taking a good 5, 10, 15 minutes and really building brick by brick an action plan with your client.
What you just said about silence is probably super critical for any attention disorder or autistic or anxiety brain, because they have so much noise that if you don't give them a quiet space to consider and think, it's going to fall out of their head. And so thank you for that. That's a good clue, because I plan to work with more ASD and ADHD in coaching, but they really are a hyperstimulated, overstimulated brain, not a deficit brain.
Sure.
With very poor processing. So thanks for that.
Yeah. Does that answer your question, Louis? Okay. The whole process, like truly, like the obnoxious thing about teaching is we expound on all this stuff, and at the end, like the end result of this thing is just do what we trained you to do in coach training. Like if you do what we taught you to do, you're aligning yourself with how the brain works. But I'm the kind of person who's skeptical and likes to know why it works, which is why I went into this in the first place. And this is why it works. You're working with the brain. If you can start to see what you're doing as a conversational neurofeedback, though, I think you'll take your work a little more seriously. This is not a conversation alone. It's not it. You're not a paid friend. You are doing something profound in the space that you hold and the questions that you ask. We also know that open-ended questions promote insight in ways that closed-ended questions do not. And here's why. If I ask you a yes or no question, you start thinking. Thinking is beta. Beta is too fast for insight. That insight happens in alpha, remember? If I ask you an open-ended question, who do you want to be in the next 5 years? You feel yourself start to think, and you feel the thoughts drifting slower and slower and slower until you're just kind of living it.
Mhm.
You feel it? Who do you want to be in the next 5 years? The thinking stops because the brain is slowing. You're getting present to the question. You're starting to visualize 5 years from now, which is a theta state. We're slowing the brain down. If I ask you a closed-ended question, is that what you want most? You're thinking right now.
Mhm. That's why
And
dichotomous thinking or questions are limiting, but also are multiple choice tests.
yeah, well, there's a lot wrong with the education system.
We're very much limiting the aha or the discovery.
Yeah. So also, Luann, ask open-ended questions, but again, it all just lines up with what we train you in coach training, right? Like this is all stuff you tell the coaches you train. I saw a few other hands up or people come off mute. With Bethany, were you one of them, or Kelly?
I mean, I feel like you answered my question. I definitely feel like I struggle sometimes to get people to the action phase. Like they want to spend so much time in the like trying to create the insight phase that I don't feel like I have enough time to adequately get to the like, how do we take that insight that you've had? But I think that has more to do with me and like making sure I'm managing the conversation versus making sure there's enough time to make that
Yeah.
at that time is basically what it is.
There's a little window after the insight happens where there's a massive dump of oxytocin and dopamine. There's also, I think, some endorphins. They're high for a slight moment after the aha. And what we want to do is take that little window, and it doesn't last very long. And we want to craft the action from that window. Think of it like a space shuttle slingshotting around a planet. We're taking that energy of the excitement and the connection and the curiosity and the achievement, and we're using that energy to slingshot into well-designed action. And what we like to do as coaches is keep exploring. We get high too, so we chase the next high. Let's go deeper. Let's ask more questions. Let's get more insight. No. If you're metal detecting on the beach and the thing goes off, you don't keep walking. You stop and you start digging. And that's what coaching is. When you find the insight, stop using your metal detector. You found the thing. Start digging. And number one thing I see in coaching sessions that messes them up is poor agenda, truly. The next thing is lots of closed-ended questions. You're not going to create insight with them. Stop. The third is not holding space. Hold space. But the fourth thing is you blow right past the insight. And that's one of the hardest things to train. It's hard to teach coaches how to spot an insight. But if you can learn to pay attention to those cues when the aha happens, and it can happen, I've seen it happen at the end of the time. Like it can happen in the first 5-10 minutes. It doesn't have to take 20 minutes to get to insight. But if you can spot it, stop looking and start digging. That felt like a shift. What do you want to do with that? What are you noticing? What's the next smallest step? How does that version of you look? What do they do? How do they feel? Going back to Luann's question, something else we can do, but I've mentioned it a few times, we do it with future self. The more you can leverage the power of the subconscious mind in a coaching conversation, the better the conversation is going to go. That's M in time, right? So M is essentially who do you want to be? How are you going to feel? What do you want to have at the end of this conversation? The subconscious mind, which depending on how you measure it, is about 90% of what goes on up here, projects into the future, imagines the desired end state, puts themselves in it, and then they come back to the conscious moment and describe it to you. The subconscious mind isn't bound by time. They're still there. As far as the subconscious mind is concerned, you already achieved it. And so when you watch the Olympics and the gymnast is in the pit and they're next on the balance beam, you see them going like this. They're doing subconscious priming. They're getting practice reps in up here because they know that's 90% as good as real practice. So when I ask my client, how are you going to feel at the end of this conversation that makes it successful, and they project themselves into that future, the more granular I get with that, how does it feel in your body? What do you see? What does it smell like? The more granular they get about the desired end state, the better the likelihood is you can coach the conscious mind into alignment. So constantly checking in with those pieces in a way where you can get the client aligned to their future self, whether their future self is half an hour from now or 5 years from now, the coaching is going to be better because you're leveraging the power of the
I'd rather
subconscious.
call it a parallel conscious mind, not a subconscious mind. It's very much more active than our conscious mind is.
It's an interesting lens for it.
It's not sub, and some of us are considering that it's a very much a quantum space, much more than just in space time. There's a lot going on there.
I think what I like about the phrase subconscious for it is one, the body of work that uses that language for it, and then two, I think of it kind of like under the ocean. Like the vast majority of the ocean is unsearched. It doesn't mean it's less than, it means it's profound and deep. And that's kind of how I see the subconscious mind. It's a profound thing we don't fully understand.
It's the iceberg, huh?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Were there some other hands up? I want to make sure we have.
Have you done any research on the change in neural circuitry as well with coaching? And that's not just macro circuitry, but the microcircuitry, the individual neuron interactions.
I've seen studies on it. I think what particularly fascinates me, the vast majority of my clients are high functioning ADD or ADHD, white collar professionals. And I think what I notice the most with prolonged coaching is I sense a difference in their synaptic pruning. So synapses are the connections between the tail of one neuron and the head of another, the axon and the dendrite. That's where the electrochemical signals send across, kind of like a spark plug in a car.
Yeah.
And those things link and stack. And in a neurotypical brain, they stack more like a Christmas tree. In a neurodivergent brain, they stack more like an oak tree. And that is, if you understand the implications of that, that is the cause of probably 60% of what we call neurodivergence, is the way that their synapses prune.
It's an ecologically developed type of brain that's necessary in society. But I might suggest to you that it's not just the endpoint circuitry, it's actually the neurons themselves that are processing and changing in their processing. We've actually seen that in regards to nerves talking to each other and changing
Mhm.
during a
I've seen some,
conversation.
I've seen some research on differences in myelination.
Yeah. But this
Um,
is actual, if you look at the actual cells interacting, you can actually see the chemical and electrical activity moving between individual neurons.
sure.
And when my cell biology days, we used to look at cells as membrane structures, not bags of water. And so they're actually akin to integrated circuits. So
Hmm.
there's a tremendous amount of processing going on the neuron itself, as well as when it gets to the central area. It's really fascinating what's going on in the brain. It's not just the 500 areas that need to be synced, but the individual neurons.
Sure.
It's incredible. I thank you for
I'd love-
letting me.
It's all right. I'd love to have that conversation with you one-on-one. There's actually there's some stuff there I'd love to pick your brain on. So we've talked about kind of the key elements of how this impacts coaching or how it informs coaching. I think the final piece that I would ask you to do is find a way to measure your coaching. And I ask you that because that's the reason I got into all this in the first place. And I wish somebody had challenged me to do it when I started my coaching career. I've coached about 7,000 hours, and the vast majority of those hours, I was not measuring what I was doing effectively. And I wish I was, because that would be a fantastic body of data. Um, you need to measure what you're doing. Because if you can't measure it, you have scientific potential, but not scientific reality, right? It doesn't take much. You can use a wheel of life when you start coaching and a wheel of life when you stop coaching. That is a rudimentary way of measuring the impact of your coaching, especially if your second wheel of life, you include a question along the lines of what percentage of this change would you attribute to our coaching together? Now you've got something you can work with, and that is a wheel of life plus one additional question. Every single one of you could start doing that today. But find some way to measure what you're doing. You don't need a $30,000 EEG headset to measure your coaching impact. I wish someone had told me that 10 years ago. I was overthinking it. Now I'm glad I was overthinking it because I've learned a ton. I wouldn't go back. But there's other ways to measure what you're doing besides measuring the brain. Um, and if you're measuring it in some way, you can better do it because the results you get will tell you what's working and what's not.
So would you say that if you are good at assessing the last session's actual um, outcome, that's one way to see how you're having success?
Yeah, so if a client comes to me and we establish 5 things they want to improve in, or we do a wheel of life and we measure on a scale of 1 to 10 how satisfied they are in these 8 areas of their life, and then we coach together. And maybe I do an assessment halfway through the package. Maybe it's a 10 session program. On session 5, we do a wheel of life again. And maybe I see 6 of the 8 wedges have moved and 2 have not, or they've gone down. That's interesting to me, right?
Mhm.
I might inquire as to why that's going on. I might change how I'm coaching them. And then at the end of working together, I might do that wheel of life again and see how things have moved. And then maybe 6 months after working with them, I email them and say, hey, Billy Bob, it was great working with you. Just as a reminder, this is the impact that we had working together. I was really impressed with the progress you made. I'm curious how it's sticking. If you would be willing to do another 5-minute wheel of life now, I'd love to see what kind of progress you're still seeing or how it is maintained. And I'd love to give you a discount on coaching through the end of the year if you do that. Now, I just increased lifetime customer value as the marketing technique, but I also got a way to measure the prolonged impact of my coaching with my clients. And I do that 3, 4, 5, 6 clients, and I've already got a decent data set.
Sure,
I
and
can say,
you've justified the meeting time. Is there anything from your research that would imply something other that should be added to the coaching algorithms like time, or are we doing things in the correct order according to how the brain processes?
it's a really good question. So when I build neurofeedback protocols or photobiomodulation protocols to use in conjunction with coaching, I mirror the conversational model pretty closely because the first step is connection. The second step is effectively precision, right? So can we connect first? Can we get precise on the agenda second? Can we get really diffuse and explore and with divergent creative thought next? Can we create insight in that space after that? And then can we craft action? So there's phases to a coaching relationship or a conversation. And if you can understand those phases, I think the coaching can be more effective, but I wouldn't inherently change the model. I think the model is actually pretty profound and very effective.
Okay.
There's good there's good evidence to support that.
How does the brain function? How does the brain function change in regards to the level of trust that's being developed?
That's a great question too. When I talk to coaches about the method that they use for coaching, we talk a lot about trust. So when I first started coaching, phone conversations were very popular. That was, the 20 teens. Most of us did our coaching over phone or VoIP. The only real good video option back then was WebEx or Skype, and we didn't use that a lot. Phone calls are great because you can feel very safe very quickly, but it's hard to build trust. In-person coaching has always been somewhat popular. It's kind of the inverse of a phone call. It's very easy to build trust, but it's hard to feel safe. A Zoom call is a nice blend of both. There's some trust, there's some safety. But if we cannot cultivate a relationship of trust with a client, the whole thing is kind of null and void. Because if they're worried about their safety, they're not going to be in the mental state to be coached effectively. And that is one thing we don't spend enough time training in coaching, in part because it puts a lot more of the onus on us. I have to do tremendous work to regulate my nervous system to connect with my client effectively. But if I can do that,
That's a key component when nurses work without medication with schizophrenic or psychotic or delusional patients. And trust actually shifts the ability of the brain to have insight and judgment. So I'd love to see how your EEG data would change by focusing on the level of trust. It'd be
it'll
fascinating.
be a fun study. Yeah. One of the biggest ways I've found to boost trust with a client is using and referencing their emotional tone. So at CTD, we talk about the time model, right? The acronym. The one piece that we haven't really delved into today is the E in echo. And we teach you to do a factual or content-based echo. Here's what I heard you say. That's great. And it checks the box for ACC. A much more effective way to echo is to echo, I feel what you feel, not I heard what you said. Because if I know as a client that you feel what I feel, I know you heard what I said, and I can also trust you. You've built relational capital. So what does that mean practically? It sounds like you really want to be a good dad, and you feel torn between providing for your family and being present for your family. And it's really important for you to find that balance. Yeah.
You're just reflecting back, though. You're not
You're
imposing.
reflecting back the emotional tone of what they shared, not the factual content of what they shared.
And
It's
you're not
not
imposing a value in them.
right. It's not the factual echo that has the impact. If I know that you heard my emotions, you felt them with me, and they are safe with you, I can then let my guard down.
Wonderful.
It's the fastest way I know to build trust. Yeah, Paul. There
Yeah,
you go.
love your clients.
Love your clients.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful bottom line and a great place to end, from one MCC to another. Thanks, Paul. Yes. Yes. Trust the process, love your clients. I mean, for all the heady, nerdy things I said in the last hour, the takeaway is pretty straightforward.
You're saying the brain's designed to be loved.
Thanks for coming, Bethany. I hope this was helpful for you. If it's something you want to learn more about, feel free to reach out one-on-one. We'd be happy to discuss it with you more. Yes, Fatima.
I have a quick question. So, your study was mostly done on adults. Have you ever done this study or research on a younger generation, like 18 to 20 demographic? Because I do academic coaching for this generation, and in that age, the neurons are still a little bit developing. And if you have done any studies, I would like to know more.
I've done neurofeedback on clients as young as 8 years old.
Mhm.
A good number of my neurofeedback clients have been teens and 20-year-olds. The first 6 years of my coaching practice were exclusively teens and 20-year-olds. Um, I have not done coaching recently with everything that I do all in one modality with teens and 20-year-olds. So I don't have research on it. Um, Broadly speaking, you're going to have the brain develops from the back forward. This is a really helpful tip for parents. So I already told you the adult brain takes data in, processes, makes meaning, decides, acts. Well, that works great for an adult brain. But if the child brain develops from the back forward, first they're just taking data in, right? And you've seen that look on babies. They're just taking data in. Get a little older, they're taking it in, they're processing it. A little older, they're taking data in, they're processing it. The next step forward is doing stuff, not making meaning or deciding.
Mhm.
They go straight from taking data in, processing it, doing stuff with it, then kind of making meaning out of what they did and kind of deciding what they want to do in the future. And that is the process until the brain is fully developed. It's not it, and this is very coarse, but it's not the process of the adult mind because of how it develops. And that doesn't change for men until 25, 28, females 22, 23. So you got to have a lot more grace for undeveloped mind because they're not making meaning and deciding before they do stuff. They're making meaning and deciding after they do stuff because the brain develops from the back front. So it foundationally changes the coaching process. You're going to have more success helping them make meaning and decide based on what they've already done instead of being future focused, which is the big difference we see when we coach adults. Coaching adults is very future focused. I would argue with teens, it's more helping them make sense of the mistakes they just made today because their brain's not finished growing yet. So it's a different model.
And have you done any research with the recent generation with the iPad kids? I would say Gen Alpha, with all of this new technology and how these younger generation are receiving more and more unfiltered data into their brain and acting on it. So do you think this has changed in your idea? Because right now I'm teaching still Gen Z and I'm coaching that demographic of that generation of Gen Z. So when I really want to make points to students, especially students who are under probation, I'll ask them this question, not in 5 years, when you are 30, what will you want to do now to help you at your 30s? Like, how do you imagine yourself with a family, without a family, and then create that image for them? And then ask them, what achievements do you think you're going to do now to help yourself in the future, not what you're going to be? So I'll ask them on the doing part right now. But with all of this technology and AI and cloud helping
Yeah.
our students learn and not process data or not enter data into their heads, do you think that the coaching will be affected with that?
My theory, and it's somewhat based on things we already know, is that we're going to start seeing an uptick in the bucket of symptoms we call ADD and ADHD. And ADHD isn't a disease, it's a bucket of symptoms. That's all it is. It's multifactorial, it's environment, it's trauma, both emotional and physical, it's genes. There's a lot of things going on with ADD, ADHD. It's a
Same
bucket.
with ASD. It's the
Nothing.
same bucket.
Sure, sure. And we do know that there's a histamine component, there's an amino acid component to ASD in particular, but it's not a disease you can catch. So it's an adaptive, I would say, not a maladaptive, an adaptive way the brain is
It's an
showing up.
ecologically developed type of person.
Sure.
It's not a deficit. It's not a divergent. We just don't use it right.
I do think there are ways to optimize the strengths and minimize the deficits for a lot of that population. But I think the screen time is going to end up creating a lot more of this bucket of symptoms that we call ADD and ASD.
But we could actually call super bright people neurodivergent because they have huge emotional social deficits. They just get away with it.
Sure. Um, I I think we're going to have to start thinking outside the box from a relational connection and attention span space, coaching younger people. The most effective way I've seen to coach Gen Alpha is actually over text.
Amazing.
You basically text them an open-ended, powerful question, and they answer you when they have an answer, and
They
you go
have silence. They have plenty of silence,
what's
right?
his space.
Yeah.
I don't know that the way that we coached generations that were raised in an analog world is going to work quite as well for coaching generations that were raised in a digital world. And it is not an inferior way to be coached. One of the coaches we trained at CTU here is a nonverbal autistic coach, one of the best coaches I've ever worked with.
Sure.
I cry every time he coaches me, and it's all text-based.
Outstanding.
He's brilliant. Text-based coaching is very effective. Don't let anyone tell you differently.
Yeah, understand.
So
You know,
there's
we've really lost something when we don't teach people to journal or write letters.
that's that whole brain thing I was talking about. Like a journaling is the penultimate, not the ultimate way of making something a whole brained activity
Yeah,
because it's you're using all of it.
yeah.
You're taking a diffuse thought, you're processing it, you're making meaning out of it, you're deciding what to write, you're going back to your language processing center, you're going to your language meaning making center, you're writing it down, you're looking at it and taking the data in. It's a whole brained activity.
The only thing that amplifies that is making it into music too.
Creative
The,
process.
the PET scans of the brain of people who are listening to music and on the way up to words, up to singing and actually having meaning. It's like the brain just lights up
Sure.
piece by piece.
I believe
Wow.
it. A lot of the work we do in vision work and coaching is it leverages creativity for that reason.
Thanks a lot, Edward.
Great to meet you, Tom.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. Any other questions before we head out?
Thank you so much, Edward. It was very insightful and very reflective.
My pleasure. Thanks for coming.